Okay, it is 11:01. Let's get started. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for this presentation and this webinar over overcoming the stigma of learning disabilities and talking about the learning disability stigma. Our presenter today is Justin Thompson from Herkimer College. My name is Ian Craig. I work at Hawks. I'm the math content manager here, so I oversee the group of editors that work on our products, and I will be your moderator today for Hawks Learning. We will have a live question and answer session after the presentation, so please enter any questions into the Q&A box as we go. So at the end, I'll make sure to read all of those and Justin can kind of address all of those pieces by the end, but please add them to the Q&A box as we go and as they come up, and we will get to them by the end of the session. I will now hand it over to our presenter. So Justin, take it away.
All right, thank you very much. So good morning, everybody. Thank you for coming to this webinar. I'm very excited about this. This is my first webinar I've ever presented, and I'm very passionate about this topic. So I'm really excited to deliver this to you today. So before I start with my webinar today, I want to give a mini disclaimer because since we're talking about, disabilities today, this is just my personal perspective. Anybody with a learning disability or intellectual disability have different experiences, come from different paths and whatnot. So this is just going to be unique through my perspective. So before we dive in today, I want to introduce myself. My name is Justin Thompson, and I'm an instructor of sociology and psychology at Herkimer College, New York. We are a very small liberal arts college. I'm also an academic coach in our academic support center. So I am in charge of the criminal justice and legal studies cohorts to teach students time management, schedule structure, study skills, and all that good stuff. And I've been doing that for about 4 years, and I've been teaching for about 11 years now. So I'm very, very excited to bring my experiences to the table today. I wanted to go over a few basic objectives today. I'm going to try to keep this very laid back and go off my experience, but also giving you some content and knowledge about ADHD and the many symptoms and issues that go with it. I'm also going to give you a little bit of the sociology of stigma that's attached to individuals that have learning disabilities. I'm going to go over a little bit about hyperactivity, impulses, inattention to details, and how we can overcome stigma and be advocates for our students and our campuses as well. So to get the ball rolling today, I like to open this up with a little bit of humor. Me and my mother were talking about this the other day and talking about my experiences as a child and how I was and how much energy I had. And I said, Mom, if I was an autobiography, what would be my title? And she quickly said without hesitation, a distraction to himself and others. And this was kind of said in humor, reflecting on my early experiences with learning disability as a child, because when we got those reports home, very great student, very friendly, great to have in class, and then ... a distraction to himself and others. And I actually had this hung in my office. It's too bad that you guys can't see it, but I have this little banner that says it as kind of a joke. But there's kind of a little bit of humor and a little fact behind that. So I'm going to dive in. What is ADHD? So the research is very interesting about this. We don't really have a root cause of how it develops. We know it's a neurodevelopmental disorder. We know it's a lifelong issue. And we do know that there are some environmental factors, but it's also rooted in genetics. So in my research and in my experiences, both of my parents had some form of ADHD. So it looked like, I might end up with some of that growing up. Now, what I thought was really interesting in some of the new expected causes of ADHD, many scientists are starting to say more and more that particular brain injury might have something to do with ADHD. There were thoughts about premature delivery. I was a premature baby. I was a month early. And my doctor told my mother, at the start of my life that he was 100% sure that being premature was one of the issues. Another issue that is starting to gain traction also is low birth rate, and also, as it always has been, substance abuse and alcohol abuse as maybe the biggest indications of how ADHD develops. Now, looking at the statistics about who has it, almost about 8.7 million adults have ADHD. About 2.6% have persistent ADHD from childhood. When I was diagnosed with ADHD, my parents told me that they really didn't start noticing it until I was in about third or fourth grade. And that's entirely not unusual to start seeing, changes, starting to see interactions in school and whatnot. I can remember in fourth grade, and my parents were very, very patient people. But if there was an ADHD medication on the market, I was pretty much on it. I was on Ritalin, Clonidine, Adderall, you name it, I was on it. And very early on in my experiences, I knew there was a problem, especially when we went on family trips. I can distinctly remember going on an overnight trip. We were going on a cruise, overnight cruise, and my mother sits down and panics that we forgot Justin's ADHD medication. And she went into this panic. And from that moment, even though I knew that they were loving and supporting parents, I knew that this was something that really weighed on their mind. When I was in fourth grade, I started to see the differences between me and my classmates early on, especially when it came to math homework. My parents would spend endless hours doing homework with me, and I would spend endless hours with my teachers in school. And my mom was worried that I was just not getting the material. She was getting frustrated. And out of a moment of frustration, I know that she didn't mean it at the time, but she said out of frustration, "Your siblings do not have this problem. Why are you so difficult? Why are you just not getting the material? And why are you being lazy?" And this is something that my mom would apologize for a little bit later in life due to the new research that came forward and my experiences in school. So this was my childhood and a little bit of my adulthood. And yes, I purposely put a squirrel on my slide because I'm not going to lie to all of you. I still have my mini, oh, look at the squirrel moments. So I felt like this fit the moment perfectly. When I was in elementary school, I had a huge speech problem. I was probably in speech until about fifth grade. Reading comprehension was weak. My vocabulary was small. I struggled to communicate with my classmates and my teachers. But there's three things that really was a problem with me early on. And my first one was inattention and staying on task. So when I was in school, and I don't know if there are any special education teachers here today, I'm just going to do a quick shout out to the teachers here. Being a special education teacher, you're really doing God's work, because being a special education teacher is much different for being a content teacher. Because when you are a special education teacher, you're teaching life skills, study skills, time management, to a population that struggles with it. And growing up in a lot of my classes, in my special education classes, I would have 12 to 13 students who suffered the same exact issues as I did. And they are very loving, very accepting, very compassionate, and foremost, very passionate about their students. So if there are any special education teachers here today, I really salute all of you in what you do. When I was in school, inattention was a big thing for me. Staying on task, organization, making mistakes, losing things, unrelated thoughts. It literally took a village. Anytime that I went to class, I would have a teacher that would say, take out your homework for the day. I would open my book bag and there would just be wads of paper from different classes and stuff that had nothing to do with school. And one of the biggest tasks for me was having full focus on my studies, especially math. And because of this, in about 5th grade, I was put in special education math classes. And then I was mainstreamed in my other ones. Now, with hyperactivity, I just have to talk about this a little bit. There is a stigma when it comes to intellectual disabilities. And I think the stigma is when people in our society think of disability, they think of physical disabilities, something that they can see with their own eyes. And when it comes to ADHD or other learning disabilities, a lot of people do not think that these are real disabilities, that they're either misdiagnosed, or maybe an individual, a child is lazy, and parents are very hesitant to test for ADHD. But in school, and even as an adult, I deal with this. I have to be moving around constantly. My students, all the time when I'm in class, I will be very passionate about a topic. I'm moving around the classroom right and left. I'm going up and down the aisles. Now, I think in my head that I'm being very engaging, I'm keeping the lesson interesting. And I actually had a student the other day after class come up to me and said, do you have ADHD because you are moving around so much and you're making my eyes go crossed because I am focusing all my time and energy following you in the room. Now, I wasn't really thinking about that because I don't want to be that type of the instructor that's perched, on a podium that kind of does the park and bark. I really want to be engaging and building a rapport with my students. But this was a moment of honesty to connect with the student. And I said, well, I do for a fact have ADHD, and this is just something that's a part of me. And the student actually seemed a little comforted a little bit and said, well, that's interesting. I struggle with ADHD too. And it just reminded me of how I act sometimes. Now, also, when individuals who have ADHD, conversations, I am guilty of this and I'm calling myself out. When I have conversations with coworkers or conversations with my students and bosses, I have trained myself over the years to fully listen to the conversation, to be engaged in the conversation, and really wait until they wrap up their conversation before I input mine. Now, to many of you, that might be very simple, but what has a tendency of individuals who have ADHD and learning disabilities of any kind, whether it's on the spectrum and whatnot, we get excited about what we're talking about. Sometimes our brains are not catching up with our mouths, and we're not really cutting you off to be rude. It's just that we're overly excited about the conversation. We're very eager to share our experiences. or very eager to bring, something to the table to further that conversation. But this is something that I'm really trying to work hard with, in the workplace, with my personal relationships, even my relationship with my significant other is something that I'm working on. Now, I can also tell you, growing up in school, and I don't know if we have any special education teachers here that maybe observe this. Very early on in the schooling process, I identified more with adults in the classroom than I did with my peers. There was kind of a disconnect for me in a while, for a while in the classroom, connecting with my peers. And it was easier for me to open up to my teachers, or authority figures or role models about what was going on in my life, what was going on at home, what was going on at school, and whatnot. And I'm 100% sure that my hyperactivity had something to do with it. Either my classmates didn't really know what to think about me and whatnot, but it was something that also went hand in hand too. Now, another thing that we all like to do, and this is another big thing, and I catch myself doing this at meetings all the time, is that I get fidgety all the time. It doesn't matter what it is. It's either with a pen or, a fidget spinner, or I have to be tapping and doing something. This is something that I have controlled. So I don't drive, people crazy in my life doing that. But that all has to do with the hyperactivity portion of it. Now, the next one, impulse. This is actually something that I still deal with as an adult. And I try to coach students in my cohort who deal with the similar problems because I understand where they're coming from with this. When we're talking about impulses, individuals that have ADHD have a tendency to think about immediate rewards, act without thinking, interrupting others, making automatic decisions. Automatic decisions meaning, I just had a student last week. She's been working hard in all her classes this semester, but really the past few weeks, she's been nosediving in her classes. And instead of connecting with her professors to see what she can do to bring up her grade and whatnot, she made a decision just to drop out of college altogether and not come back. Now, this is a very personal decision, and I gave her the best advice how to make the decision. And about 2 days later, she frantically called the college and said, I made a decision. I didn't think about the decision. Can I re-enroll and finish my classes for the semester? And sadly, what we had to tell her was, since there's only 2 weeks left of the semester, she wasn't going to be able to re-enroll in her classes. And we instructed her that, in the future, when you make decisions, make sure you make them with your advisor, faculty members, and your parents, because once the decision is made, it's really hard to backtrack on it. Now, another one is act without thinking. Many people who have ADHD have a tendency of doing things without thinking it over, thinking about the repercussions for behavior, the cause and effect and what have you. And similar circumstance, I worked with a student the other day who we were trying to get, their anger, under control and connect them with services. And, we were consistently telling the individual to control their behavior. These are the methods that you can use if you feel like you're going to have an episode. And he hears it, but also he still acts without thinking. So that is a huge, huge thing as well. Now, inability to delay gratification, I can personally attest to this sometimes. If I'm sending emails, whether it's to a boss or maybe coworkers, sometimes I have this habit of checking up on emails too much and not giving enough time because I want this done. I want this settled. I want that gratification of getting something done. And this is actually something that I've been working on in my life as well. Now, I did not put on this list, and this was an afterthought. I'm going to talk about hyperfixation. Now, a lot of autistic individuals, but also individuals with ADHD, have issues with hyperfixation. Now, basically what it means, we're totally immersed in what interests us. So it doesn't matter if it's music, if it's movies or shows, if it's a book or learning a new skill or an activity. This is basically our brains functioning with brain hyperactivity. When we get really fixated on something, we really become interested, we really become immersed. And I can confide in you two things. When it comes to hyperfixations, one, it's always music. I have a certain playlist that I have to use when I work out, when I'm at work. It's the same songs that I listen to over and over again. But even though I'm hyperfixated on it, it still creates comfort. It still creates an aspect of a safety zone. When I was growing up, I was asked why I watched the same movies and shows over again. And my response was because I know the outcomes, I know how the movies are going to end. I was able to identify with the characters, and that was also a comforting aspect. Now, I can admit too that during the COVID pandemic, there were a lot of hyperfixations just because I had too much time on my hands. A lot of us worked remotely. A lot of us didn't have that structured schedule and routine like we had. So I finished a graduate degree program during that time because I was interested in that topic. And COVID was a weird time for all of us. So I always like to interject a little bit of honesty toward that. Now, these are also a lot about what I struggled with in school. And this is where I'm really going to talk about my schooling experiences. And some of these are going to be very rigid experiences. But to set that up, I'm going to have to tell you that I was in high school, middle school, high school in the late 90s. So a lot of practices that are in place right now were not in place during my time in school. And to really set this up, starting in 6th grade, I really started attending resource room quite a bit and became very involved in my IEP. And the first time that I knew that I was different from my other classmates, every Friday in 6th grade, we had foreign language day. I was really pumped about it, by the way. We had a high school teacher who came into the school, and every Friday for the first half of the year, we learned Spanish, and the second half of the year was French. And the very first day of class, I had my workbook. The teacher was coming in. He was explaining what we were going to be learning. And all of a sudden, from my seat, I see the resource teacher at the doorway signaling for me to leave the room. And at the time, I couldn't really understand why I had to be removed from the classroom during foreign language. So, of course, being in 6th grade, I refused. I didn't want to go to the resource room to do homework or whatnot, but she eventually removed me. And she removed me without really any explanation. So finally, after about 3 to 4 weeks, she said something that stuck with me, and this would stick with me into my education experiences. She goes, "Justin, your speech is horrendous. The volume of your voice is distracting to the instructor and the students. You are never going to go to college. You do not need to learn another language. Time well spent can be done using math and English homework. This is the exact words from my resource teacher in 6th grade. Now, being a kid, that crushed me. And it really gave me a blow to my self-esteem at the time. And I remember going home one day to my parents. My dad was a military man, so, he was a man of a few words, but my mom was really, a very full out advocate. And I go, Mom, what is so different about me? Why can I not be in the classroom with my classmates learning something that I'm interested and passionate about? And my mom, thought about it long and hard before she answered. And she goes, Justin, some people have different abilities. Maybe it's not your time yet to learn Spanish. Maybe that's for the future. Now, at the time, she was being very diplomatic, and I'm sure she didn't want to hurt my feelings. But also during this experience, I had a hard time understanding social cues. I wasn't reading the body language that I had to leave the room. I wasn't taking the cue, that this wasn't for me. And it was something that I really needed to work on as I went through school. Now, also on this list, as a student, I had very disorganized thoughts. And if you saw any of my papers, growing up in middle school or in high school or even in college, they were lit up like a Christmas tree. Grammar was something that I always struggled with early on. And eventually, when I got to college, I got to be a better advocate for myself. And I'm actually going to get into that a little bit now. So that was 6th grade. When I got to middle school, I had a good experience. I was taking the occasional, mainstream classes. I was taking a special math class. I get to 9th and 10th grade, and I'm getting excited about college. I know that I'm going to go to college for criminal justice. I have the classes that I want to take. 9th grade, I took the bulk of my electives, and I get to my 10th grade year, and it's the end of the school year, and I have my IEP meeting. Now, many of you, if you are special education administrators or teachers, you know what IEPs are. They're individual plans that basically outline your weaknesses, sometimes your strengths, look at where you are emotionally, and basically outline what's going to happen in your future. I can remember this like this was yesterday. I'm in my IEP meeting, and I call this people talking about you like you're not in the room. You're at this big table with your resource teacher, your parents, maybe a general education teacher, an administrator, and they're basically plotting your path for after high school. So I'm at the meeting, and basically they're going over my Regent scores, and they notice that I failed in ELA Regents by a point. The conversation started by yanking me out of an ELA Regents class because of failing by 1 point and putting me in a special education English class. My English teacher for the semester said that I don't think that's required. He has an 86 to 87 in my class. And they were very determined to get me into classes that I didn't need. So we're thinking about the future. They said, Justin, what do you want to do? And I said, I want to go to college. I want to go to BOCES for career tech education. My guidance counselor heard what I wanted to do. And these are exact words. She said in front of a room of 8 to 9 people that college was a waste of money. I would be happy to get a job at Burger King or Walmart. I didn't have the intellectual capacity to handle college material. I was going to fail out of college. And if I did go to BOCES, it would be a waste of $10,000. And end quote. There was a hush over this room. No one really knew what to say at all. My parents were upset. I was upset. My resource teacher was even upset as well. And after about 2 minutes of taking in what just happened, my resource teacher, who I never heard swear, and I'll keep it PG for a webinar. I never heard my teacher swear before. She looked at everyone point blank and said, like hell, Justin, we're going to enroll you into the Career Tech Education Center. You're going to be prepped for college. You have potential. I'm going to work with you over the next 2 years to help you get into college. I was blessed in that area, and I'm going to tell you why. When we think about disabilities and stigmas, there is a sociological theory that I like to bring up. And it's basically stigma theory by Irving Goffman. He was basically a Canadian American sociologist, and he was really the first sociologist to talk about stigma and how we have a tendency in our society to give a blanketed generalization of populations, whether it's disability, sexual orientation, race, national origin, what have you. He basically noted that when we stigmatize groups, when we don't take a case-by-case approach, in this case, learning disabilities, because they are so unique and so different, there are many individuals with ADHD and autism and Asperger's who are very high functioning and very capable of handling college level work. And when I thought about this experience, about what I had, going forward in my education in 11th and 12th grade, 11th grade, I had the best year I had in high school. I was on the honor roll for the first time in high school in 3 classes. I became a member of the VICA Honor Society at BOCES. I had 90 averages for both semesters. My self-esteem, however, was low. I had a mentor that changed my life forever, the biggest advocate that I had. He was a judge in his community, special operations in the military, and he pulled me aside one day because we had to do employability evaluations and to prep for our internships. And he pulled me aside and he said, Justin, you're very smart, you're motivated, but why does your self-esteem stink? And I thought about it before I answered him. And I said, Mr. Murtha, the reason why I think I struggle with my self-esteem is because I've been told no so many times growing up and in my educational experience. He agreed that that might have been a problem. And he said, today is a new day. You're going to prove many wrong, and you're going to make a great life for yourself and putting in the work that you're going to put in. I took his advice, and a year later, in 12th grade, I found myself with a career technical endorsement on my diploma. I completed FEMA disaster training, first aid and CPR, which is good because I learned better hand-on. I passed an internship with flying colors, and I earned 2 college credits at the end of my senior year in high school. At the end of my high school career, I found out that my guidance counselor was going to be retiring, and there was going to be an opportunity for us to speak and to wish her well. I took this as an opportunity to go and wish her well, but I also needed some kind of closure from my high school years, because anytime that I felt like I was going to give up when I was in college, and there were many times, I thought about what she said. And she was really the one that inspired me to get through my college years. So I had the opportunity to connect with her when she retired, and it was a get together. And I had prepared notes, and I thought I knew what I was going to say. And then I figured coming from the heart, coming from an honest place was probably better. I decided that I was really going to have my moment and really share my experience with her. And when I got up to the podium and I saw her, all that could come out of my mouth was, "Thank you for doubting my abilities. Thank you for doubting me, and thank you for what you really said that day during my IEP meeting." Because anytime when I was going to throw in the towel, I thought about what you said, and I finished my educational goals. Now, it was hard because I struggle with anxiety and depression and low self-esteem, but I did it. I went to a community college. I earned my 2-year degree. I went to a 4-year school and dual majored, and I graduated with honors. And then I tackled graduate school with a 4.0 average. The first time in my life that I felt confident in my abilities. And when I say this, it's not patting myself on my back. It's coming from a place that if we are treating individuals with intellectual disabilities in a blanketed way, we are dimming their light, their potential, where we should be encouraging, supporting, celebrating individuals if they decide to pursue a college program and future programming, whether it's a college or a trade school. Now, at the end, she thought about this and she apologized, and it came from a very sincere place. And, she said, "I feel bad for stigmatizing you. I've been in this position for 30 years, and I guess sometimes it's easy to just treat everybody differently." When we understand stigma and how to avoid it and understand what it does to individuals with intellectual disabilities, we can end the stigma. We can get a better general understanding of the populations that we work with and with our students. Now, what I'm showing you, and I know that time is, starting to tick down. I have a few other things I want to share, and I definitely want to open this up and talk about, what I found in my experience and others. Believe it or not, these are several phrases that I encountered even in college, and even, I dare say, in the workplace. One of the biggest things is assumptions of low intelligence. When I had an interview for a different institution, it's not the academic institution that I'm at now, my dean, when he heard, because I was, full of disclosure, I have a learning disability, even though I don't have to disclose. When he heard that I had a learning disability, he goes, "Wow, but how? You're so smart. You can't possibly have a learning disability." He was operating under the assumption that individuals who have intellectual disabilities have low intelligence. And that's totally not the case. When it comes to proving worth or intelligence, we all have different roadmaps on how we get there. I joke with coworkers all the time. If I'm telling you a story, I'm giving you so many off ramps to the outcome of the story, it's not even funny. Where some people will go A, B, C, and D. This is what happened in the story. I'm taking you off multi exits. And that's just because how our brain works. A lot of other things. Assumptions of low achievement potential and resulting discouragement from more advanced academic pursuits. I got this at the end of obtaining my bachelor degrees. My academic advisor told me that graduate school would be a much bigger transition than, a 4-year degree. And he said, you got your 4-year degree. You don't have anything else to prove. Why don't you just skip on over graduate school? One of the biggest ones is the denial that learning disabilities are real, such as you just need to try harder, stop being lazy, and don't be difficult, are still evident. Not even in high schools, but also college. And the last one, when we give accommodations, when any student comes to me with an accommodation letter in my class, it's a very intimidating moment for the students. Basically, what that accommodation letter says, here are my weaknesses. This is what I need for the class. These are the services that I need, whether it's extended testing, a separate environment, a digital recorder for notes. Anytime a student gives me an accommodation letter, I see the look on their face and how difficult it is for them. And to lighten the mood, I take the accommodation letter, I crumble it, I keep it, obviously. I crumble it and I look at them and I go, what are your strengths? And they're shocked. They go, well, what are you talking about? I said, what makes you wake up in the morning? What are you passionate about? Why are you in college? What is your why? What is your grit and motivation? And the first thing they do, they look at me and they say, I love art because I like making this world beautiful. I said, that's beautiful. I like writing. I stink at writing, but I enjoy writing poetry. I enjoy journalism. I love sharing my work, even though it's flawed, with my peers. I personally think we should be doing more of that in our schools. Acknowledge that we have to work on the weaknesses. We have to work on them. And you know what? With time, the proper support system, the proper people, we're going to do it. But we also have to motivate, encourage, because sometimes in my experience, we are going to be the only person that might do that for a student, where they might not have parents at home that understand what college is. Maybe they're a first-generation college student. Maybe they're too scared to seek counseling or the academic support center or advisement. If one faculty member picks up on this, becomes a coach, becomes a motivator, and becomes the biggest cheerleader for a student, that's going to be the difference between leaving school and coming back in the fall or spring semester. And in my time as an academic coach in my position, I am jealous that a lot of our students are now more self-advocates. They have the courage to seek out help. They understand what they need. They understand, yes, I have an IEP from high school. It doesn't automatically carry over to college, but I'm going to go into the academic support center. I'm going to go to accessibility, and I'm going to set myself up for success. I'm going to get my coaching, I'm going to get my tutoring appointments, and I'm going to walk across the stage. This semester, I am so proud, and I'm going to call this student Robert. Robert came to me 2 years ago, struggling at home, struggling to find his identity and his purpose. His first and second semesters were awful. He was ready to throw in the towel. He was done with school. He didn't think it was from him. And I said, you know what? I'm going to be your accountability partner. The center is going to be your accountability partner. I want you to take summer classes and winter classes, and I want you to come and see me over the next few semesters, and we're going to work together, and we're going to get you on that stage. I am proud to say that in 3 weeks, this man with a 3.40 average will be walking the graduation stage to get his associate degree. That means a lot to someone in my position. And even as educators, when we can see the evolution of students and what they've encountered, the adversity, the no's, the stigma, and they still have that fire inside of them to succeed, that is something that's going to drive them for the rest of their life. And it's so early, it's so important to nurture that very early on in the educational career. And there are moments where I wish I had that experience in my schooling, because I would have died to have that courage, to go in and say, this is what I need. This is what I need to do my job. I want this. And I am so happy to see so many this semester, first generation students who have overcome adversity, walking that stage. And I'm not going to lie, I'll be in the audience embarrassing them. I'll scream their names. I'll have pom-poms. I'll embarrass them. But it's good that they do have that moment of recognition, at the end of the semester. So it's getting close to the end, and I really want to open this up. I really wish I had more time to dive into a lot of this, but I really wanted to just give you a very brief, explanation, of what, I dealt with and what exists out there. So I really want to open the floor to like any comments, constructive criticism. This is my first webinar, so I am very open to critiques, but I'm also curious about your questions too. And I believe there might be a chat box for that, if I'm not mistaken,
Yeah,
for,
you're right, Justin. There is a
okay,
Q&A box here that you can actually access and
okay,
ask questions if you would like.
okay,
So we will give it another minute or so just to see any questions come through, and then I'll start kind of wrapping up after that.
sweet.
We do have a raised hand here, so if it's Myra, I'll allow you to talk and ask that question if you'd like. You can go ahead and unmute yourself and ask if you would like.
Um, Hi, I just have a question as it relates to your academic coaching. And
Okay.
thank you for bringing up Goffman. I'm a sociologist by trade as well. And Goffman is just the bomb.
Oh yeah, I agree.
But I am currently the coordinator of tutoring and supplemental instruction at a HBCU. And what I'm noticing we've just started this new program of resilience coaches, and I'm wanting to build more of a wraparound service. I've been in contact with our disability services person, and I see it a lot. I have ADHD myself, both my children, and I see a lot of students that come to my office that don't have never been diagnosed, but they're off the charts. Or they had their IEPs and 504s in K-12 and they get here and they never had to advocate for themselves at the K-12 level because it seems like everybody there just wants to stick a label, you know? And
Yes.
so when they get here, they don't even know how to advocate. So how do you guys do that with that academic coaching? Because we've been told, you know, you can't tell them that they have a disability, yada, 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 yada. But when you suffer from that same disability, so you see the earmarks, how do you walk around that without saying to that student, well, you have a disability and you need to go to disability services?
That is a very great question. And it's interesting that you bring up the concept of like, because coaching at our institution is starting to change. And I know that some institutions are doing holistic support coaching, where it necessarily does not really center on like just the disability. We've been noticing since COVID, there has been a massive uptick in like anxiety, depression, motivation, connecting with professors. What I do in the position that I'm in right now with academic coaching, when we have our orientation in August and in January for new students, we have an optional session with our accessibility office, and our director of accessibility really frames it in a very neutral way that won't come out like you said, you know, you have a disability, you need to do this. She frames it in a way that if you've benefited from this in high school, it's not going to completely follow you, and you would benefit from this in college. And we show them how it will benefit. You know, we have data that shows, you know, the students that we've worked with, you know, over the course of the years, you know, the success rates with tutoring, the success rates with coaching. And that's usually a good starting point to get them into the door of the academic support center. But there's a big thing, and this is what I'm struggling with this semester. There is a huge stigma for students recognizing that they need support in the academic support center. It's the notion in their head that it's not cool getting tutoring because it might mean that you're struggling. You know, it's not cool to get the academic coaching, to organize yourself, get that time management. And what we really do up here, like during Christmas, you know, we have drop-in hours where they can just drop in, get an appointment. There's movies, there's popcorn, there's games up here that, you know, their academic coaches and tutors are part for. And we find that doing like these simple activities really get them into the door. And once they connect with many of the individuals that are up here and they see that friendly face every day, the stigma of getting help reduces. But it's very hard now with, you know, getting people in the door to even colleges. We're experiencing that too. And unfortunately, no matter how dire the situation is with a student, we can't just come out and say, oh my God, you need this. Why are you not getting it? So it's very difficult. And it just depends on what academic institution you're at. You know, either it's holistic support, we're connecting you with like counseling or whatnot, or it's straight up traditional coaching.
Thank you for that answer, Justin. And Myra, thank you so much for jumping in. We do have some questions that I do want to go over. I recognize that we have about 5 minutes left. So in 30 seconds to a minute, Justin, what advice do you give students about how to explain ADHD to their parents?
Okay, so I don't personally talk to the parents myself. That would be accessibility, the director of accessibility in our office. Usually when we do intake, the parents will come with their son or daughter to begin with. In the most extreme cases, half the time we don't know students need services until halfway through the semester. we're actually getting students right now, day by day, 2 weeks left, that are requesting services. It just it varies greatly, but that's something that I personally don't deal with as the Office of Accessibility.
That makes sense. That makes sense. And in my experience as an educator, that I feel very similar to that. Two kind of questions that are somewhat related. What are some ways to motivate students who struggle with putting in the time to study? Because this particular attendee says that they don't want to say something like try harder or spend more time doing or something like that, right? But in some cases, this attendee is saying that that they think the student should be studying for more hours and really putting more time in. So how do you motivate students who are struggling with the time aspect?
So the time aspect, I'm dealing with this with a lot of students who are doing online classes this semester. How I tell my students, I'm going to use online classes as an example because these students have the most vulnerable time management skills. I usually tell students, especially with ADHD who are taking online classes, treat it as a Monday, Wednesday, Friday class. That on 3 days a week from 9 o'clock until 10:10, you are logging into this class. You are doing class discussions. You are communicating with the professor. And I have found a tremendous success rate with that, because that way the students are treating that virtual class as an actual class they're going to. And it's really improving their success rates. They're not getting, those starfish messages about, the risk of being withdrawn, or, attendance risk. They're actually, going to the class and doing what they're supposed to be doing.
Wonderful. Thank you. How about how do you find yourself combating the situation of having professors and instructors who seem to disregard the accommodations in the classroom, but then can potentially be confronted and say that they are actually adhering to them when they're not? Have you run into this situation?
Oh, goodness. All right. So it doesn't happen much, but there are instructors from time to time in the past that I have dealt with that will be very difficult for the student to get their time expanded or separate location, because in the professor's eyes they're thinking that they're getting an unfair advantage. They're getting more time than their classmates, they're getting special treatment. And that's where we really step in, the Office of Accessibility, that says, listen, you're going to violate disability law here. These are the accommodations that they need, whether you like it or not, and we have to accommodate these students. And most of them will, but even with the really the instructors that are really bad, it's an opportunity to educate. And we do that with a lot of professional development during the year as well.
Wonderful. I do see that we have a hand raised. I want to address this question that came through first. An attendee says, you speak very clearly. What things were done to address your speech issues that you had in the past?
Oh, goodness. So growing up from about, second grade to about fourth or fifth grade, I can't quite place it. 2 to 3 weeks, I had to go to a therapist in the school. A lot of the skills that were worked on with me was pronouncing words, vocabulary, phonics. She thinks, and I don't know if this was actually, I don't know if this was actually the truth, because I cannot verify this one way or another. It was kind of suggested that when I was born, I was behind on a lot of milestones that were not diagnosed right away. So that I might have had a tongue tie very early on. I might have had some kind of cognitive issue very early on that could have made me very, very delayed. I'm not quite entirely sure about that, because it has never been reflected on any of my IEPs. But I do just remember, since elementary school, going to a speech therapist. And I can honestly tell you, to this day, I struggle sometimes with speaking. Like every now and then, I'll have like a stutter or something, that comes out. And I feel that that's always going to be an issue, I think, as long as I have my ADHD.
Well, thank you for sharing that. It looks like that is all the time that we have for questions. Thank you, Justin, and thank you to all for attending today. We will be emailing you a link to view the recording of this webinar once it is available. If you or any of your fellow instructors are interested in presenting for our Learning and Growing webinar series, please submit your proposals to the Learning and Growing website, which is linked in the chat. These free webinars are brought to you by Hawks Learning, an innovative educational courseware company. And to learn more about our mastery-based course materials and how Hawks can enhance your learning outcomes for you and your students, please visit www.hawkslearning.com. Hope everyone has a wonderful rest of the day, and thank you so much to you, Justin, and for all for attending today's webinar. Have a wonderful day. Take care.